Welcome to another edition of America's Godly Heritage. We're still in the midst of the Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan, and today we're going to be looking at chapter 15. Here we have Christian and Hopeful, and they've just arrived at the Delightful Mountains. These mountains are going to be another place of rest and refreshment and teaching for them. When they arrive, they meet some shepherds, and not surprisingly, these shepherds represent pastors. It's not too hard to get the connection there since pastors are actually called shepherds in the Bible. So these shepherds are actually watching over sheep, as in sheep the animals, but these sheep represent the human sheep, the human flock of the shepherds or pastors' congregation in the local church. So these shepherds have names. They are knowledge, experience, watchfulness, and sincerity. And again, Bunyan's not being subtle here. These are the qualities that every good shepherd, every good pastor should have in leading their congregations. And in fact, back at House Beautiful, we already saw another representative of a pastor whose name was Watchful. So Christian and Hopeful encounter these shepherds. The shepherds proceed to greet them, and Christian asks them some questions. He says, "Is this the way to the celestial city?" And they answer, "You're in that way." "How far is it to there?" inquired Christian. "Too far for anyone except those who indeed get there," answered the shepherd. "Is the way safe or dangerous?" asked Christian further. "Safe for those for whom it is to be safe," said the shepherd, "but the rebellious stumble in it." Okay, these answers are really less than helpful. All they want to know is simple answers to these questions that they're asking, and yet the shepherds are giving them these cryptic, weird answers. And it's kind of frustrating. As annoying as these answers are, they are actually right in line with some of the things that Jesus taught when he was here on earth. Oftentimes, when Jesus was asked a question or he encountered people, he gave them cryptic answers. What is the point of this? Is it just to annoy people? No. The point of all of this being cryptic and mysterious and vague is so that the listener would have to dig deeper into these answers and figure it out. Jesus wanted people to be able to think for themselves. He wanted people to take the time and put in the effort to figure out the points he was trying to get across. So I'm going to take a few moments to just look very briefly, not go into depth at all, of a few examples from the Gospels of where Jesus is cryptic. Our first example comes from Luke 7, verses 18 to 23. And that is where John the Baptist is in prison, and he's wondering, was all of his life's work worthwhile, or had he gotten God's message completely wrong? And so he sends some of his disciples to Jesus to ask whether or not Jesus is the Messiah. Instead of just giving John a straight yes or no, he says, well, look at what's going on. The blind see, the deaf hear. Go tell your master what's going on here. John's probably like, thanks a lot. That really helped. But Jesus' answer was, he was fulfilling the things that the Messiah was supposed to be fulfilling. So yes, that is the answer to John's question. The next example comes from Matthew chapter 13, verses 1 to 23, and that is the parable of the sower. One of Jesus' favorite teaching techniques is to use parables. Parables were teaching stories, allegories that he would use to make a spiritual point, much like Pilgrim's Progress uses allegories to make spiritual points, so that people could come out and they could just listen to a good little story, a good little anecdote, and walk away going, yay, that was a nice story. But those who wanted to dig deeper and to actually know the point Jesus was trying to make by that story or that teaching using allegory, They would dig deeper. They would think about it. They would chew on it. They would talk to their friends or their family members about what was Jesus trying to teach them there. So those people would get a lesson out of it. They would learn from it. The shepherds in Pilgrim's Progress are also using this technique of let's use some kind of weird, mysterious answers to these questions. So let's go back to them. Is this the way to the celestial city? You're in that way. Okay, that one's relatively straightforward. It's yes, this is the path. You're on the right path. You're on the right way. Well, how far is it to there? Too far for anyone except those who indeed get there. The shepherds also make a comment later on that a lot of pilgrims had started on this journey, but they don't make it to the delightful mountains. So them saying it's too far to the celestial city for some means some drop out along the way. Some get stuck at a certain point. Not everyone makes it to the celestial city, so for some people, it's too far. But some people do make it to the celestial city. Of course, them saying, well, actually, it's 5 miles down the road would have been a lot more helpful. But the point is, everybody's journey is a different length. Some people learn their lessons and move along quite quickly. Some people are slower in learning their lessons and it takes them longer to get to a certain point. We all have our different journeys that God has appointed for us. So you can't really say the celestial city is at this point because it's different for every single person. Okay, what's the next question? Is the way safe or dangerous? The response is, it's safe for those for whom it is to be safe, but the rebellious stumble in it. Okay, well, let's hope that we're amongst those it's safe for those for whom it is to be safe. But the rebellious, those who don't listen to the instructions, those who decide they're going to go off and do their own thing, those who aren't paying attention, they're going to be in trouble. Because think of all the directions that Christian has been given so far, and when he follows those directions, he is safe. And when he doesn't follow those directions, such as when he went off the path into Bypath Meadow and got caught by the giant and thrown into the dungeon, then he wasn't safe. Think about formalist and hypocrisy who climbed over the wall of salvation and started down the road, but then they decided instead of going up the hill of difficulty like they were supposed to have, each went off on a different side path and they were never heard from again. So the narrow path, the way to the celestial city, is safe for those for whom it is safe, not so much for others who are rebellious. Whew, well, that's exhausting. Much like what Christian experienced at House Beautiful, the shepherds then ask the pilgrims, this time as Christian and hopeful, where they've come from, what they're doing, what their adventures have been up to this point. And then they decided they liked the answers that they were given, so they brought Christian and hopeful into their tents, because they didn't have a house. They had their tents, their shepherds, so they're moving around, and they fed them, and they gave them a place where they could get a good restful sleep. The next morning, instead of just sending them on their way, the shepherds said, how would you guys like to see some wondrous things? Ooh, okay, let's do that. The shepherds then take them up to the hill Error to show them this cliff. When they look over the edge of the cliff, they see, oh, great, there's bodies down there. Well, what happened to these guys? The shepherds respond that like Hymenaeus and Philetus, they dabbled with things that were not theologically correct. They were basically had gotten into some heretical teaching and beliefs. In this particular case, it was that their resurrected bodies had already happened, even though they were still in their physical bodies here on earth. And that comes from 2 Timothy 2:17 and 18. Because they were believing things that were not correct, they went off the path and they fell over this cliff. So just like they were fallen theologically, they fell physically and they died at the bottom of this cliff. So this is the shepherd's warning against error, hill error. Then the shepherds take Hopeful and Christian to a mountain called Caution. There, they show the gentleman, way off over there in the distance, you see over there? And they're going, yeah. They can just see some people wandering around tombs, and it looks like they keep tripping over things and bumping into things, and something's just not right. So the shepherds say, you see those guys over there? Well, they were on the narrow path like you were, but when they got to that rough spot near Bypath Meadow, they climbed over the fence and indeed went into Bypath Meadow. Then they got caught by Giant Despair, put in his dungeon, and then the giant put their eyes out and left them in the tombs to wander around. So this is really upsetting to Christian and Hopeful, because this should have been their ending too. They too had gone into Bypath Meadow and gotten captured by the giant, put in a dungeon, but they'd managed to escape rather than this last punishment of having their eyes put out and being left to wander around the tombs. So they're just horrified at what they're seeing of what their end could have been. Then the shepherds take them to a third spot, and this too is kind of horrifying. It ends up being the back door to hell. The shepherds open the door and they can see that it's dark and that it smells like fire and brimstone, and they can hear people screaming and it's horrible. And they're like, oh goodness, no. The shepherds say that this is a particular door reserved for hypocrites. The shepherds then point out a few examples of hypocrites from the Bible. First one is Esau, and he's from Genesis 25:27-34, who sold his birthright for basically some stew. Another one was Judas. This is Luke 22:1-6, Luke 22:47-48, and John 18:1-3. They say that Judas sold his master. In other words, he sold Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. Then we have Alexander, who blasphemed the gospel. This is referred to in 1 Timothy 1:18-20. And then we have Ananias and Sapphira, who lied and pretended in Acts 4:32-5:10. In each of these cases, these were people who professed to have salvation in the Lord, but then their actions showed they basically gave up their faith for some kind of gain. Bunyan refers to this as presenting a show of pilgrimage. They acted like they were on the journey to the celestial city, but then their lives showed that they really weren't. Upon seeing such a horrible end for those who had supposedly professed their faith, Christian and Hopeful look at each other and go, ugh, we really need help from the strong one. In other words, God. They need help from God. They need His strength to get them through their journey, because they know they can't do it on their own strength. So finally, the shepherds take them to one last place, and they look through a perspective lens, which is another word for a telescope. But they're so upset by what they've seen that their hands are shaking, and they're trying to look through the telescope, but their hands are shaking so badly they can't see very well. So they only get a glimpse of the gate and the glory of the celestial city, but they do at least get a glimpse of it. So they know they're headed in the right direction. They've seen again where they're going, ultimately, the next step. And it's encouraging because they know it's real, they know it's there, they know they're heading in the right direction. Then the shepherds send them on their way. They don't just leave them empty-handed, they give them something that's really useful for their journey. They give them a map. So Christian and Hopeful now have a map to help them on their journey. The shepherds also warn them, don't talk to the flatterer. And then they also warn them, don't go to sleep on the enchanted ground. So we have all kinds of foreshadowing of things that are coming up ahead. We have some kind of a guy named Flatterer. We have something called the enchanted ground coming up. We have the celestial city that they're still heading for. So let's take a little segue here and have a look at some of the ways in which House Beautiful and the Delightful Mountains were similar. First of all, the shepherds' tents and House Beautiful are located on a hill or a mountain. The shepherds' tents are located on the Delightful Mountains, and House Beautiful is located on the Hill of Difficulty. Next, in both places, there is a person called Watchful, and in both places, Watchful represents a pastor. Next, both locations represent the church. In addition, both locations are places of refreshment, fellowship, maturing, and spiritual teaching. Here's another one. The hosts ask the pilgrims questions about their journey up to that point in time. And then following that, the hosts like the answers they hear, and they admit the pilgrims into their homes. Then the hosts provide a meal. The hosts provide a restful place to sleep. The hosts show the pilgrims excellent or wondrous things. The hosts show the pilgrims a glimpse of the amazing place towards which they are heading. At House Beautiful, they gave them a glimpse of the Delightful Mountains, and in the Delightful Mountains, they're giving them a glimpse of the Celestial City. And finally, when the pilgrims depart, the hosts provide a helpful gift to them. At House Beautiful, the ladies there provided Christian with some armor, and now the shepherds are providing Christian and Hopeful with a map. At this point, Christian and Hopeful set off on the next leg of their journey. So stay tuned for Chapter 16, and we will see what happens next. Thank you for listening to this edition of America's Godly Heritage. We hope you have a great day. Bye. Help us spread our message. Please support us through any or all of the following. 1. Clicking the like button for this podcast. 2. Becoming a forerunner and subscribing to our page on Buzzsprout or Patreon, which will sow some financial provision into our work. 3. Following us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Truth, or X. And finally, 4. Praying for us. If you want to check out the primary and secondary sources used to make this podcast, you can view them at the end of the video version, which is shown on YouTube and Patreon. We really appreciate your support. Thanks again. Bye.